Isabella Hartwell's reflection stared back at her from the floor-to-ceiling windows of her downtown Miami penthouse, 20 stories of glass and steel separating her from the December evening below. The city sprawled out in a constellation of lights, each one representing someone going about their normal Thursday night, probably not contemplating corporate suicide or the ethical implications of putting 200 people out of work 3 weeks before the investors pulled the plug on everything she'd built. Her phone sat on the marble counter like a loaded weapon, notifications piling up faster than she could dismiss them. The latest email from Gerald Pemberton, lead investor and professional dream crusher, had arrived at 6:47. Subject line: final numbers needed by Monday. Body text: 3 paragraphs of thinly veiled threats dressed up as concerned guidance about fiduciary responsibility and market position. The black cocktail dress hanging on her bedroom door mocked her with its optimistic cut and the price tag she'd forgotten to remove. $460 for fabric and thread, which seemed absurd now that she was calculating her company's burn rate in her head for the millionth time. Her calculator app had become her most used feature, surpassing even email, which was saying something for a woman who had slept 4 hours a night for the past 6 months. December in Florida meant Christmas lights strung between palm trees and temperatures that barely justified the cashmere wrap draped over her couch. The weather app showed 74 degrees with a chance of rain, which felt like a metaphor for her entire life lately. Perpetually warm on the surface, storm clouds gathering just out of frame. Rachel's contact photo flashed on the screen before the phone actually rang because her best friend had a sixth sense for when Isabella was about to bail on something. The image showed Rachel mid-laugh at last year's New Year's party, champagne in hand, her dark curls wild around her face, everything about her screaming joy and spontaneity and all the things Isabella used to know how to feel. The call connected before Isabella could decide whether to answer or let it go to voicemail. Rachel's voice came through crisp and knowing. "You're standing in front of those windows doing your brooding CEO thing, aren't you?" Isabella's hand went to her hip, defensive posture, automatic. "I'm getting ready." "You're catastrophizing. I can hear it in your voice." The view outside shifted as Isabella turned toward the kitchen, marble and chrome, catching the recessed lighting she'd spent $3,000 installing last spring. Her espresso machine gleamed unused in the corner because she'd switched to the coffee shop downstairs after realizing she was averaging 16 shots a day and her hands had started shaking during board meetings. Rachel pressed on. "Bella, you can't cancel. I promised Tanya you'd be there, and she's been talking this guy up for 3 weeks. My company is imploding." "Your company has been imploding since August. One night won't change that." Isabella pulled open her refrigerator, surveying the contents with the detached observation of someone who'd forgotten what normal eating habits looked like. Greek yogurt from last Tuesday, leftover sushi that was definitely past safe consumption, a bottle of white wine that she'd opened for a celebration that never happened, the cork shoved back in at an angle. She reached for the wine, thought better of it, closed the door. Rachel's tone shifted, dropping the playful edge. "When's the last time you did something that wasn't about work?" The honest answer would be pathetic, so Isabella deflected. "I went to that gallery opening last month. With clients, for networking. I enjoyed the art." "You spent the whole time on your phone and the artist literally asked you to leave." That had been mortifying, actually. The young photographer had very publicly called her out for representing everything wrong with the art world: commercialization over creation, and Isabella had apologized while simultaneously checking her email about the Bergdorf's order that was 3 weeks delayed. The dress on the door swayed slightly in the air conditioning current. Isabella had bought it on impulse during a lunch break she couldn't afford to take, walking past the boutique window and seeing it displayed on a mannequin with better posture than she'd had in months. The salesgirl had wrapped it in tissue paper with reverence, like it was going to change Isabella's life instead of just taking up space in her closet alongside 12 other impulse purchases still sporting tags. Rachel's voice gentled. "Tanya says he's a good guy. Widower single dad, runs his own business. Not looking for anything serious, just trying to get back out there." "That makes two of us not looking for anything serious." "Exactly. So go have dinner. Remember what it's like to talk to another human being about something other than quarterly projections. Worst case, you get a free meal and a story." Isabella moved to her bathroom, flipping on the lights that her interior designer had insisted would be flattering. They were technically if you were going for the look of someone who'd been carefully embalmed. Her skin had that translucent quality that came from spending too much time under fluorescent office lighting, and the circles under her eyes had upgraded from suggestion to statement. Peace. Her makeup bag held enough product to stock a small Sephora accumulated over years of believing that the right foundation could mask the fact that she was running on fumes and stubbornness. She pulled out concealer in a shade called Optimistic Nude, which felt on brand. Rachel was still talking. And honestly, even if it's terrible, at least you'll have left the building. Your doorman asked me last week if you were okay because he only sees you coming and going at weird hours. Marcus worries too much. Marcus is paid to notice things, and he's noticed that you're basically a ghost who occasionally materializes in designer heels. The concealer went on in careful strokes covering evidence of the 3 a.m. panic attack she'd had while reviewing the Market Street property specs. The building was perfect, everything they needed for the flagship expansion, and the timing worked if they could close by January 15th. Gerald had the purchase agreement ready to sign contingent on final board approval, which should have been a formality, except Christopher, her business partner, was getting cold feet about the debt load. Isabella's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her eyeshadow palette. The colors had names like Ambition and Empire, which the marketing team had probably thought was empowering, but just felt accusatory now. Rachel sensed the silence stretching. You're doing the thing where you're catastrophizing again. I'm doing my makeup. While catastrophizing, I can hear the wheels turning through the phone. Isabella's reflection stared back, one eye shadowed in Empire, the other bare. The asymmetry felt appropriate. What if I can't save it, Rach? The company or the date, both either. I don't know anymore. Rachel's exhale was patient, the sound of someone who'd been having versions of this conversation for 2 years. The company isn't going to implode in the 3 hours you're at dinner. And if the date's terrible, you text me the code word and I'll call with a fake emergency. What's the code word? Alternator, because nobody uses that word in casual conversation. Isabella finished, the second eye studying the effect. She looked almost human now, almost like someone who had their life together instead of someone held together by caffeine and increasingly creative accounting. Her closet was a testament to every version of herself she tried to be. The corner dedicated to power suits in shades of navy and charcoal armor for board meetings and investor pitches. The section of cocktail dresses for networking events and gallery openings. The forgotten athletic wear from when she'd briefly convinced herself that yoga would help with stress before realizing that lying on a mat, trying not to think about work, was just another form of work. She pulled the black dress off its hanger, feeling the weight of the fabric, the quality that you could identify by touch alone. This was the kind of dress that said you belonged in rooms with people who summered in the Hamptons and knew the difference between Chateauneuf-du-Pape and regular wine. The dress slid on like a second skin, fitting in all the places it was designed to, creating the silhouette that fashion magazines called effortless, but required daily Pilates and a carefully calibrated relationship with food. Rachel was still on speaker, her voice bouncing off the bathroom tiles. You're putting on the dress, right? Tell me you're putting on the dress. I'm putting on the dress. Good. Now put on the heels that make you feel like you could conquer small nations. Isabella's shoe collection occupied an entire wall of her walk-in closet organized by color and heel height, like a particularly fashionable library. She selected black Louboutins with the red sole that cost more than her first car back when she was 23 and stupid enough to think passion and hard work were enough. The heels clicked against the hardwood as she walked back to the bathroom mirror, and something about the sound was grounding. This was her language, the semiotics of success that she'd learned to speak fluently. The right dress, the right shoes, the right confidence. Rachel's tone shifted to satisfaction. You're walking differently. I can hear it. You put on the good shoes. They're all good shoes. You put on the conquering nation's shoes. I know that. Click. Isabella's phone buzzed against her ear, an incoming email from Christopher with the subject line, "We need to talk about Market Street." Her stomach dropped 3 floors. Rachel caught the shift in breathing. You just got a work email. No. Yes, you did. Your entire energy just changed. Whatever it is, it can wait until tomorrow. Isabella swiped to see the preview text. Gerald called me directly. He's pushing for the demolition timeline to move up. We need to discuss the community impact assessment before Monday's meeting. Demolition timeline. Community impact assessment. The words were clinical, corporate speak for destroying people's livelihoods and calling it progress. The Market Street property was a small commercial complex anchored by businesses that had been there for decades. A garage, a dry cleaner, a pizza place where 3 generations of the same family had worked. The kind of places that real estate developers called underutilized assets and local communities called the heart of the neighborhood. Rachel's voice cut through. Bella, whatever that email says, it's not an emergency. It's about the Market Street deal, which you're presenting on Monday, which means you have all weekend to stress about it, which means tonight you're going to put on lipstick and go meet a nice man who probably has no idea what a quarterly earnings report is. Isabella reached for her lipstick, a shade called Power Play, that her makeup artist friend had recommended for situations requiring confidence you didn't actually feel. The color went on smooth, transforming her mouth into something decisive. Her jewelry box held pieces accumulated over years of treating herself for hitting milestones. The Tiffany necklace for her first major investor meeting, the Cartier bracelet when they hit $1 million in revenue, the diamond studs when they went national. Each piece was a marker of success, proof that she'd made it, except making it apparently meant being 3 months away from total collapse. She selected simple studs, nothing flashy, going for understated elegance, because Tanya had described this guy as down-to-earth, and showing up dripping in diamonds felt like showing up in a different language. Rachel was doing her supportive but firm voice. Okay, you're dressed, you're gorgeous, you're going. I'm hanging up now before you think of another reason to bail. I haven't thought of any reasons to bail. You've thought of 16. I can hear you thinking them. But you're going anyway because you promised me, and because somewhere under all that CEO armor is the girl I met in college who used to do spontaneous things. The girl Rachel was talking about felt like a character from someone else's story. That Isabella had worn thrift store finds and stayed up until 3 a.m. talking about dreams and believed that wanting something badly enough could make it happen. That Isabella hadn't yet learned that the fashion industry would chew up your dreams and spit out market analysis. Her reflection in the full-length mirror showed a woman who looked like she belonged in the penthouse, like she'd earned every expensive inch of it. Except behind the careful makeup in the designer dress was someone who couldn't remember the last time she'd slept through the night without waking up in a panic about cash flow. Rachel's voice turned gentle. You deserve this, Bella. You deserve one night where you're not carrying the weight of everything. Just be a person. Just see what happens. The call ended before Isabella could formulate another excuse, leaving her alone with her reflection and the knowledge that Rachel was probably right, which was annoying because Rachel was almost always right about things like this. Her purse was already packed with the essentials. Phone, wallet, lipstick for touch-ups, the compact mirror she used for checking if she had food in her teeth after business lunches, keys to the car she barely drove because parking in downtown Miami was a nightmare, designed to test your commitment to vehicle ownership. The elevator down to the parking garage was empty, all mirrors and soft lighting, and Isabella used the descent to practice her smile. Not the corporate smile she deployed at networking events, all teeth and strategy. Something real, something that might convince a stranger she was a normal person, capable of normal interactions. Her car sat in its assigned spot, a sleek black Mercedes that her accountant had suggested she buy for the tax write-off, because apparently driving a certain caliber of vehicle signaled to investors that you were successful enough to trust with their money. The logic was circular and slightly ridiculous, but she'd learned early that fashion was built on circular, ridiculous logic. The engine started with the quiet purr of German engineering, and the dashboard lit up with more information than any human needed. Fuel level, tire pressure, engine temperature, directions to her destination, already queued up from the last time she'd looked up the address. Pinewood Cafe on Maple Street was a 23-minute drive according to the GPS, which meant she'd be fashionably on time if she left now and traffic cooperated. The road took her through neighborhoods she never visited, past the Gallery District, and into areas where the buildings were shorter and the streets had actual trees instead of decorative palms. Isabella merged onto the main road, her hands at 10 and 2, like her driving instructor had taught her 15 years ago, when getting a license felt like freedom instead of another thing to maintain and insure. The radio was tuned to NPR, a program about the housing crisis that she immediately changed because she didn't need more information about how market forces destroyed communities. She settled on classical music, something instrumental and emotionally neutral, letting the violins fill the space where her thoughts were trying to catastrophize about everything that could go wrong tonight. What if he was terrible? What if she was terrible? What if they sat in awkward silence while she mentally calculated the restaurant's profit margins based on menu prices and estimated overhead? What if Rachel was right and she'd forgotten how to be a person? The GPS chirped directions in its calm, authoritative voice, and Isabella followed them on autopilot, her mind already racing ahead to Monday's board meeting. She needed to present the Market Street acquisition with confidence needed to make the numbers work in a way that satisfied Gerald while not completely mortgaging their future. The property was perfect, the location ideal, the timing tight but manageable. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. Text from Christopher, "Call me when you can." Gerald's being unreasonable about the timeline. Isabella's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Gerald was always unreasonable about timelines. That was his entire personality. He'd made his fortune in commercial real estate by being the guy who pushed faster and harder than anyone thought possible, and he expected the same aggressive expansion from every company he invested in. Another text. He wants to know if we can close by January 10th instead of 15th. 5 days. Gerald wanted to shave 5 days off a timeline that was already aggressive. 5 days that could mean the difference between a smooth transition and a chaotic mess that left her looking incompetent. The classical music swelled violins, reaching some crescendo that probably meant something to people who understood music theory. Isabella's knowledge of classical music began and ended with knowing that it signaled sophistication in the same way that ordering wine by Vineyard, instead of color, signaled that you'd been places. The neighborhoods were changing. Now buildings getting shorter, commercial, giving way to mixed-use developments with restaurants on the ground floor and apartments above. This was the part of the city where people actually lived, where rent was measured in hundreds instead of thousands, where the coffee shops had handwritten menus instead of branded apps. Another buzz. "Rachel, you're not turning around right," Isabella typed back, one-handed, which she knew was dangerous but felt necessary. "I'm going." "Good. Text me when you get there so I know you didn't stage your own death to avoid small talk." The cafe was supposed to be charming, according to Tanya's description. Family-owned, been around for 30 years, the kind of place that knew regulars by name and had a handwritten specials board. Isabella's experience with charming was limited to the kind that came with prefix menus and sommelier recommendations, but she could adapt. The GPS showed 3 miles remaining, estimated arrival time 7:04. She was going to be exactly on time, which felt like a small victory in a day that had contained mostly defeats. Her phone screen lit up with another notification. Email from Gerald with the subject line, "Time-sensitive opportunity." Isabella's stomach clenched because Gerald's time-sensitive opportunities usually meant someone else's disaster that he wanted to capitalize on. She couldn't look at it. Not now. Not while she was supposed to be transforming into the kind of person who went on blind dates and made small talk about normal things. The road curved through an older neighborhood houses with actual yards and cars parked in driveways instead of underground garages. Christmas lights were strung along roof lines, the kind of elaborate displays that required planning and coordination, and the type of free time Isabella couldn't remember having. 1 mile remaining. Her heart rate picked up, which was absurd. She'd pitched to rooms full of investors who could make or break her company with a single decision. She'd negotiated contracts worth millions. She'd fired people who cried and hired people who lied about their qualifications. But sitting across from a stranger and pretending to be a functional human being felt impossibly difficult. The GPS announced her turn onto Maple Street, and Isabella guided the Mercedes onto a narrower road lined with local businesses. A hardware store with a hand-painted sign, a bookshop with a window display of staff recommendations, a vintage clothing store that she would have found delightful if she wasn't actively fighting the urge to turn around. Pinewood Cafe appeared on the right, a corner location with large windows and warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. The kind of place that Instagram users would call aesthetic and food critics would call authentic. Isabella checked her makeup in the rearview mirror one last time, wiped away a slight smudge of mascara. Reapplied her lipstick with the precision of someone going into battle. Her hands were shaking slightly as she turned off the engine. This was ridiculous. She was Isabella Hartwell. She'd built a fashion company from nothing, survived 2 recessions, and maintained a 60-hour work week for 2 straight years. She could handle dinner. The car door opened, and December evening air washed in warmer than it should be, carrying the smell of coffee and something baking. Her heels clicked on the pavement, the sound reassuring in its familiarity. She was halfway to the cafe entrance when her phone rang. Christopher's name on the screen. Isabella answered, keeping her voice low. "I'm about to walk into dinner." Christopher's voice was tight with stress. "I know, and I'm sorry, but Gerald just sent over revised numbers. He's threatening to pull the entire investment if we don't commit to the January 10th timeline." The world tilted slightly. "He can't do that." "He absolutely can. It's in the contract. If we don't hit agreed-upon expansion milestones, he has the right to withdraw funding." Isabella's free hand went to her forehead, trying to massage away the headache that was blooming behind her eyes. The January 15th timeline was the agreed-upon milestone. Was, past tense. He's saying market conditions have changed and we need to move faster or lose our competitive advantage. That's not how any of this works. Christopher's exhale was sharp. That's exactly how this works when you're dealing with someone who controls 60% of our funding. He wants an answer by Monday morning, and he wants a detailed plan for how we'll accelerate the Market Street acquisition. Isabella looked up at the cafe windows, seeing people inside laughing and talking like they didn't have investors threatening to destroy everything they'd built. "I'll call you back. After dinner. I'll call you after dinner." She hung up before Christopher could protest, silencing her phone completely and shoving it into her purse like that could somehow silence the panic rising in her chest. One dinner. She could survive one dinner. The cafe door was heavy wooden glass, the handle warm from other people's hands. Isabella pulled it open, stepping into warmth and the smell of coffee and fresh bread and cinnamon. A woman behind the counter looked up, smiling, with the practiced warmth of someone who had spent decades in customer service. Gray hair pulled back in a bun apron, dusted with flour, the kind of face that belonged in a stock photo labeled grandmother. The woman's smile widened in recognition. "You must be Isabella. I'm Harper. I own this place. Your table's ready, but your date hasn't arrived yet. Can I get you started with something to drink?" Isabella scanned the space, taking in the mismatched furniture that somehow worked, the local art on the walls, the chalkboard menu with handwritten specials. This was so far from her usual environment that it felt like visiting a different planet. Her professional voice engaged automatically. "Just water for now, thank you." Harper led her to a corner booth with a view of the street, and Isabella slid in, grateful for the familiar feeling of leather against her back. The table was worn wood, marked with the kind of character that came from years of use, and there was a small candle in a mason jar providing ambiance. Isabella pulled out her phone despite having just silenced it, checking for new disasters. 3 emails since she'd parked. She opened the first one before remembering that she was supposed to be present, supposed to be human. The phone went back in her purse. She was here. She was doing this. Rachel would be proud, except her mind was already racing through the implications of Gerald's ultimatum. January 10th was impossible. The Market Street property owner, a Mr. Chen, who'd built the complex 40 years ago, had been clear that he needed time to notify his tenants, time to help them relocate. They'd negotiated January 15th specifically to give everyone breathing room. Moving the timeline up meant cutting corners, meant people getting blindsided, meant being the kind of corporation that cared more about profit than impact. Isabella's reflection in the window showed a woman who looked calm and put together, like she belonged in this cafe with its handmade charm. But inside, she was calculating how many employees she could afford to keep if Gerald pulled funding, how long the company could survive on remaining capital, whether Christopher would stay if everything fell apart. Outside, snow started to fall. Actual snow in Florida, which was meteorologically unlikely, but apparently happening, fat flakes drifting past the streetlights like the universe was staging some kind of Christmas movie moment. Isabella watched the snow and thought about how she was supposed to be feeling something romantic or hopeful, but mostly she felt tired. Bone-deep, soul-level tired that no amount of sleep could fix. The cafe door opened, letting in cold air, and a couple laughing about something shaking snow from their coats. They looked happy, uncomplicated, like their biggest concern was whether to split dessert. Isabella envied them with an intensity that was probably unhealthy. Her phone buzzed in her purse, muted but insistent. She ignored it. Whoever it was could wait. Everything could wait for the length of one dinner. Harper reappeared with water in a glass that had probably been washed, 1,000 times ice cubes clinking gently. He just texted that he's running a few minutes late. Car trouble. Car trouble. Of course, because this night wasn't already perfectly set up to be a disaster. Isabella thanked Harper and pulled out her phone to check the message Christopher had definitely sent. But it wasn't Christopher. It was an unknown number with a Miami area code. The message read, "This is Mr. Chen's daughter, Lynn. My father wanted me to reach out about the Market Street property. We received a call from someone at Pemberton Investments asking about accelerating the timeline. My father is very upset. He made commitments to his tenants." Isabella's blood went cold. Gerald had gone around her, contacted the property owner, directly started applying pressure without telling her. This was breach of protocol, at best sabotage at worst. She typed back, "I apologize for any confusion. I'll call you first thing tomorrow to discuss." Lynn's response came immediately. "My father is 83 years old. He built that property with his own hands. The garage has been there since 1982. The Washington family has been his tenant for 40 years. You need to understand what you're asking him to do." The Washington family. Isabella hadn't thought of the tenants as families, as people with histories and roots. They'd been items on a spreadsheet, square footage, and lease terms and relocation costs estimated in round numbers. Her hands were shaking as she typed, "I understand. We'll talk tomorrow." The phone went back in her purse, but the damage was done. She couldn't unknow what she now knew, couldn't pretend this was just a business transaction when it involved 40-year relationships and 83-year-old men who'd built things with their own hands. Outside, through the snow, headlights appeared and disappeared, cars navigating the weather. Isabella watched them and wondered if one of them contained her date, the stranger who was about to sit across from her while she pretended her entire life wasn't imploding. 7:15. He was officially late, which meant she could leave without being rude. She could text Rachel the code word, claim an emergency, go home, and deal with the Gerald situation and the Chen situation and all the other situations that needed dealing with. Her hand reached for her purse, fingers closing around her phone. And then the cafe door opened again, bringing with it a gust of cold air and snow, and a man who looked nothing like what Isabella had been expecting. He was tall, with dark skin and close-cropped hair, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt that looked freshly ironed. There was oil under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing had completely removed, and his shoes were work boots that had seen better days. He looked real in a way that people in Isabella's world rarely did, like someone who worked with his hands and meant what he said and probably had never calculated the ROI on a personal relationship. Harper greeted him with the warmth of someone who knew him. Deshaun Washington, right on time despite the weather. Washington. The name hit Isabella like a physical blow. Washington as in the Washington family who'd been tenants at Market Street for 40 years. Washington as in the garage she was about to destroy. This couldn't be happening. The universe couldn't be this cruel or this coincidental. But Harper was leading him toward her table, and he was smiling with the kind of nervousness that made him human and approachable, and completely unaware that the woman he was about to have dinner with was planning to demolish his entire livelihood. Isabella stood because her corporate training demanded it, extending her hand like this was a business meeting instead of the worst possible collision of personal and professional. His hand was calloused and warm grip, firm, but not aggressive. "I'm Deshaun. Sorry I'm late. I had to help someone with car trouble on the way over." His voice was deep, with a slight southern accent that softened the consonants, and his smile reached his eyes in a way that made Isabella's chest tighten with guilt she hadn't even earned yet. She managed to keep her voice steady. "Isabella, and no worries about being late." They sat and Harper brought menus, and Isabella was trapped in this booth with a man whose life she was about to ruin, and he had absolutely no idea. The universe, it seemed, had a truly terrible sense of humor. Deshaun's morning had started the way most mornings started, with Zoe's foot in his ribs at 5:43 a.m. His daughter had somehow migrated from her twin bed across the hall into his queen-size mattress, and she slept like a starfish designed to take up maximum possible space. Her curls were wild against the pillow, one of her pink socks missing her Moana pajamas twisted around her small frame. He extracted himself carefully, trying not to wake her, padding barefoot across the cold floor to the bathroom that still smelled like the lavender soap Tanya had bought in bulk because it was on sale. The mirror showed a 34-year-old man who looked 40 dark circles under his eyes that came from 4 years of single parenting and running a business that operated on margins thin enough to see through. The shower was lukewarm because the building's water heater had been acting up again, and Mr. Chen kept promising to fix it, but the old man was stretched thin, trying to maintain a property that was slowly falling apart around them. Deshaun made a mental note to look at it himself this weekend, because that was the kind of thing you did when your landlord had given you a fair deal for 2 decades and treated you like family. By 6:15, he was dressed in work clothes that smelled like motor oil no matter how many times they went through the wash. The Washington's Garage logo was embroidered over the breast pocket, a design his father had sketched on a napkin 30 years ago when he'd first opened the shop. Deshaun touched it sometimes without thinking, a talisman against the constant pressure of keeping a legacy alive. The apartment above the garage was small but home. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened onto a living room where Zoe's toys lived in organized chaos. Photos covered every wall, including the ones of Keisha that Tanya kept asking if he was ready to take down. He wasn't. He'd probably never be ready. Keisha smiled from the mantle in her favorite photo, the one from their wedding day, where her natural hair had been styled in braids crowned with flowers, and Deshaun had worn his father's suit altered to fit. They'd been 23 and stupid in love, and convinced that wanting something badly enough could protect you from cancer. It couldn't. He'd learned that the hard way. Zoe stirred in his bed, making the small noises that meant she was waking up, and Deshaun headed back to intercept before she woke up fully and panicked about being alone. She'd been doing better with the separation anxiety, but mornings were still hard. He scooped her up, still half asleep and warm, carrying her to the bathroom where her step stool waited by the sink. "Morning, pumpkin." Zoe's eyes opened slowly, focusing on him with the intense scrutiny of a 6-year-old, making sure the world was still safe. "Is it a school day?" "Thursday? So yeah, but tomorrow's Friday and then weekend." She perked up at that because weekends meant pancakes and cartoons and trips to the park if the weather cooperated. Her routine was sacred, Deshaun had learned. Structure made her feel secure in a world that had taken her mother and could theoretically take anything else without warning. They went through the morning routine that they'd perfected through repetition. Teeth brushing with the Moana toothbrush that played music for 2 minutes. Face washing with the gentle soap that didn't sting her eyes. Hair care that Deshaun had learned through YouTube videos and practice because nobody had taught him how to maintain a black girl's natural curls, and he'd had to figure it out through trial and error. He sectioned Zoe's hair, carefully applying leave-in conditioner and working through tangles with a wide-toothed comb while she sat still and trusted him not to hurt her. This was their time, these quiet mornings, just the two of them against the world. Tanya had offered to teach him more complex styles, cornrows, and twists and designs that other girls at Zoe's school wore, but Deshaun stuck with what he knew. Simple parts, neat braids with colorful beads at the ends that clicked when Zoe moved. It worked. Zoe studied his face in the mirror while he worked. "Are you nervous about your date tonight?" Deshaun's hands paused. "What makes you think I'm nervous?" "You have the little line here." She pointed to his forehead. "You always get it when you're worried about something. Too perceptive for 6. That was Keisha's genetics at work, the observation skills that had made her an excellent nurse and a devastating poker player. He finished the second braid, attaching beads in pink and purple because those were Zoe's current favorites. "Maybe a little nervous. It's been a long time since I went on a date. Aunt Tanya says you need to remember how to have fun." "Aunt Tanya says a lot of things." Zoe giggled, hopping off the step stool to examine herself in the mirror. She was wearing her favorite school outfit, purple leggings with a sparkly unicorn shirt, and she looked so much like Keisha that Deshaun's chest ached. Breakfast was cereal because they were running behind schedule, and Zoe chattered about a project at school while Deshaun checked his phone for messages. 3 texts from Tanya, all variations on "don't bail on this date," and one from his best friend Marcus asking if he needed a pep talk. He didn't need a pep talk. He needed a time machine that would take him back to when Keisha was alive and life made sense. But that wasn't an option, so he finished his coffee and got Zoe's backpack ready, and tried to ignore the knot of dread building in his stomach about having to make small talk with a stranger while pretending to be someone who had his life together. The drive to Zoe's school was 5 minutes through streets Deshaun knew by heart, past businesses he'd watched open and close over the years. The neighborhood was changing, tech workers moving in and driving up, rents, old families moving out because they couldn't afford to stay. Mr. Chen had been getting calls from developers for 3 years now, people wanting to buy the Market Street property and turn it into luxury condos or upscale retail. He'd resisted so far loyal to his tenants, but the old man was tired and his daughter Lynn was pushing him to sell while the market was good. Deshaun tried not to think about what would happen if Mr. Chen finally said yes. Where would the garage go? How would he afford commercial rent anywhere else in the city? The business barely broke even most months, and that was with Mr. Chen charging below market rates. Zoe's school appeared on the right, a low building with a playground where kids were already gathering, despite the early hour. Deshaun pulled into the drop-off lane, kissing Zoe's forehead before she scrambled out with her backpack bouncing. "Love you, Daddy. Don't be nervous. The lady's gonna love you." She was gone before he could respond, racing toward her best friend Maya, with the kind of energy that only existed in people under 4 feet tall. Deshaun watched her go, feeling the familiar squeeze of single-parent anxiety. Was she okay? Was he doing enough? Would she grow up and resent him for all the things he couldn't provide, all the ways he fell short of being both mother and father? A horn honked behind him, parent in an SUV, gesturing impatiently. Deshaun pulled forward, heading back toward the garage and the work that was piling up. Thursday was usually a heavy day for repairs, people wanting their cars ready for the weekend. He had 4 appointments scheduled, plus whatever walk-ins showed up with emergencies. The garage was a one-man operation since he'd had to let his assistant go last spring when business slowed down. He'd learned to do it all himself, diagnostics and repairs and customer service and bookkeeping and the 1,000 other tasks that came with owning a small business. It was exhausting, but it was his built on the foundation his father had laid. The garage sat on the corner of Market Street and 3rd, a square building with 2 bays and an office that doubled as storage. The sign outside needed repainting. The letters faded from years of sun exposure, but Deshaun kept putting it off because paint cost money and there was always something more urgent. Inside smelled like motor oil and old coffee, familiar and comforting in its predictability. His first appointment wasn't until 8, so he had 30 minutes to do paperwork that he'd been avoiding. The office was cramped, every surface covered with invoices and parts catalogs, and the framed photo of his father cutting the ribbon on opening day. Marcus Washington Sr. had been a giant of a man, 6'4", with hands that could rebuild an engine from memory and a voice that could fill a room. He'd taught Deshaun everything about cars and about running an honest business in a world that rewarded cutting corners. A black man's reputation is all he's got, so you better make it count. He'd said that so often it had become a mantra, words Deshaun heard in his head when making decisions. The bookkeeping software showed numbers that made Deshaun's stomach turn. Revenue was down 18%, from last year expenses were up 12%, and the profit margin was basically a rounding error at this point. He needed to raise prices, but raising prices meant losing customers to the chain shops that could undercut him with bulk purchasing. His phone buzzed. Tanya, because of course it was, "I set out your date outfit, dark jeans, blue button down, iron the shirt." Deshaun typed back, "I know how to dress myself." "Do you though? Because left to your own devices, you'd show up in work clothes smelling like transmission fluid." She wasn't wrong. He'd been planning to shower and throw on clean jeans and call it good. "Her name's Isabella. She runs a fashion company. Be nice, be yourself. Don't talk about Keisha unless she asks." That last part stung, even though Tanya meant well. She'd been pushing him to date for 2 years since what she called an appropriate mourning period had passed. But grief didn't work on timelines, and Deshaun still reached for Keisha in the middle of the night, sometimes forgetting for a second that the other side of the bed would be empty. His first customer arrived at 7:55, a regular named Mrs. Patterson with a Honda that was older than Zoe and held together mostly through prayer and Deshaun's maintenance work. She was 70-something and lived on a fixed income, and Deshaun charged her costs for parts because his father had always said you took care of people who couldn't take care of themselves. The Honda needed new brake pads and an oil change, basic work that Deshaun could do on autopilot while his mind wandered to the evening ahead. What did you talk about on a blind date? Tanya had said Isabella was successful, ran her own company, which probably meant she was driven and ambitious and had her life together in ways that would make Deshaun's situation look pathetic by comparison. He was a widower living in an apartment above a struggling garage, raising a 6-year-old alone, barely making ends meet. What could he possibly have to offer someone like that? The brake job took 45 minutes, and Mrs. Patterson tried to pay him double his quote, which he refused because he wasn't taking advantage of elderly women on fixed incomes, regardless of what it did to his bottom line. The next customer was a walk-in college kid with a Honda Civic that was making a noise he described as like a dying cat mixed with a garbage disposal. Deshaun popped the hood and identified the problem in 30 seconds: alternator going bad, which was a repair he could do in an hour if he had the part in stock. He checked his inventory, found a rebuilt alternator that would work, quoted the kid a price that was fair, and got started. Working on cars was meditative, the only time Deshaun's brain really quieted down. There was a logic to mechanical problems, a clear cause and effect that you could diagnose and fix. Not like parenting where you made your best guess and hoped it didn't screw up your kid. Not like grief where nothing you did made the pain actually go away. By noon, he'd finished 3 repairs and started on the 4th, a timing belt replacement that required precision and patience. His back ached from bending over engine blocks, and his hands were stained with grease that no amount of industrial soap completely removed. Tanya showed up at 12:30 with lunch because she had a sixth sense for when he was planning to skip meals. She let herself in through the office door, paper bag from the Thai place 2 blocks over in hand. "You're still planning to go tonight, right?" Deshaun didn't look up from the engine. "Do I have a choice?" "No, I already told Isabella you were coming, and I vouched for you being a decent human being, so don't make me a liar." Tanya was 3 years younger with their mother's face and their father's stubbornness. She'd appointed herself Deshaun's keeper after Keisha died, showing up at random times to make sure he was eating and sleeping and generally functioning. She perched on the edge of his workbench. "Zoe helped me pick Isabella's profile. She saw the picture and said you'd like her." "Zoe is 6. Zoe has better instincts than you do. When's the last time you were actually interested in someone?" The honest answer was never, not since Keisha, but saying that would start a conversation Deshaun didn't want to have. "I'm going to the date. I'll be nice. If it's terrible, I'm blaming you." "Fair enough." Tanya pulled out containers of pad thai, the smell making Deshaun realize he hadn't eaten since the cereal at breakfast. "For the record, I think you're going to like her. She seems real, not just polished corporate." They ate in comfortable silence, Tanya scrolling through her phone while Deshaun mentally calculated how far behind schedule he was. The timing belt job was taking longer than expected, and he still had one more appointment at 3. Tanya looked up. "Did Mr. Chen say anything else about the property sale?" Deshaun's appetite disappeared. He got another call from a developer last week. Lynn's pushing him to at least hear them out. "And if he sells, then I figure out where to move the garage. Or I don't, and I close up shop and get a job working for someone else." The thought made him sick. This garage was his father's legacy, the thing Marcus Washington Sr. had built from nothing, the promise Deshaun had made to keep it running. It was also the only life he'd known for 12 years, since the day after high school graduation, when his father had handed him a set of keys and said, "It's ours now." Tanya's voice was gentle. "You know I've got savings if you need help with rent somewhere else. I'm not taking your money. It's not charity, it's family, helping family. Dad would want me to figure it out myself." Deshaun cut her off, not harshly but firmly. "I'll handle it." Tanya didn't push, which meant she was saving the argument for later. She finished her pad thai and threw away the container, pausing at the door, "The 7 o'clock at Pinewood Cafe. Don't be late, and for the love of God, iron the shirt." After she left, Deshaun worked through the afternoon appointments with mechanical efficiency, his mind half on the repairs and half on the evening ahead. By 5:30, he was cleaning up the garage, wiping down tools, and organizing the workspace the way his father had taught him. The apartment upstairs was quiet when he got there, and Deshaun stood in the doorway for a moment looking at the life he'd built here. Zoe's drawings covered the refrigerator, stick figures labeled Daddy and Me, and sometimes Mommy in Heaven. The couch still had the blanket Keisha had crocheted while pregnant, colors she'd chosen because they were gender neutral. He picked up Zoe from after-school care at 6, listening to her chatter about art class and recess, and how Tommy pulled Maya's hair and got in trouble. She was still talking when they got home, barely pausing for breath, while Deshawn made her dinner. Chicken nuggets and apple slices, the same thing she ate 3 times a week because getting her to try new foods was a battle he didn't have energy for. Zoe sat at the table with her homework practicing spelling words, while Deshawn showered and changed into the outfit Tanya had laid out. The shirt did need ironing. He set up the ironing board while Zoe supervised, offering commentary on his technique. "You missed a wrinkle there, Daddy." "I see it, Pumpkin." "Aunt Tanya says you have to look nice for your date. She says first impressions matter." Deshawn pressed the iron against stubborn fabric, steam rising. "What else did Aunt Tanya say? That the lady is really pretty and she likes fashion like me, and maybe she can teach me about designing clothes." Zoe's eyes were bright with possibility. "Do you think she'd do that?" "I don't know, baby. We're just meeting for dinner. But if you like her, and she likes you, then maybe she'll come over sometimes, and then I could show her my drawings, and she could teach me stuff." The hope in Zoe's voice made Deshawn's chest tight. She wanted a mother figure so badly, had been asking about it since she was 4, and understood that other kids had mommies, and she didn't anymore. He hung up his shirt, turning to kneel at Zoe's level. "I need you to understand something, okay? This is just dinner. I'm not looking for a new mommy for you. I'm just meeting someone nice and seeing if we can be friends." Zoe's face fell slightly, but she nodded with the resilience that still surprised him. "Okay, but if you do like her, you'll bring her home to meet me, right? Because I should get to meet her too, if she's going to be important." "Deal." Tanya arrived at 6:45 to watch Zoe letting herself in with the spare key and immediately critiquing Deshawn's appearance. She made him change his shoes, adjusted his collar, and gave him a pep talk that basically boiled down to, "Don't be yourself, be the version of yourself that's dateable." Zoe stood by the door in her reindeer pajamas, hands on her hips, like a tiny drill sergeant. "Daddy, you promised Aunt Tanya you'd go. And Washingtons don't break promises, right?" Deshawn had to bite back a smile because she looked exactly like Keisha when she was being stubborn about something. "Right, no broken promises." He kissed Zoe's forehead, grabbed his jacket, and headed down to his truck with the feeling of a man walking toward his own execution. The truck was a 2005 Ford F-150 that he maintained himself, engine running smooth because he'd rebuilt half of it over the years. The interior smelled like coffee and the pine air freshener Zoe had insisted they needed, and the radio was stuck on the country station that reminded him of his father. Pinewood Cafe was a 20-minute drive in good conditions, but snow was starting to fall, actual snow in Florida, which was rare enough that Deshawn took it as a sign. Good or bad, he couldn't tell yet. He was 10 minutes from the cafe when he saw the Mercedes pulled over on the side of the road, hazards blinking, a woman in heels and a coat standing next to it, looking frustrated and cold. Deshawn's instinct was automatic, the way his father had raised him. You didn't drive past someone in trouble, especially not a woman alone at night. He pulled over, checking his phone quickly to see if he had time. 7:05. He was already late, but helping would make him later. But the alternative was leaving her stranded in the snow, and that wasn't an option. He got out, keeping his hands visible, so he wouldn't scare her, approaching slowly. "Ma'am, you okay? Car trouble?" She turned, and even in the dim light, he could see she was beautiful in that polished way that spoke of money and maintenance. Dark hair, expensive coat, heels that were completely inappropriate for the weather. Her relief was visible. "Yes, it just died. APOA says 2 hours." Deshawn nodded, already moving toward the hood. "Mind if I take a look? I'm a mechanic. Might be able to help." She stepped aside and he popped the hood, pulling out the small flashlight he kept on his keychain. The problem was obvious within 30 seconds. Alternator shot, probably the same issue the college kid's Civic had this morning. "Your alternator's shot, but I can patch with it enough to get you where you're going, where you headed." Her voice was cultured, professional. "Pinewood Cafe on Maple Street." Deshawn straightened up, laughing because the universe apparently had a sense of humor. "No kidding, that's where I'm going too. Small world." He caught her expression in the streetlight, something flickering across her face, surprise maybe, or interest. She was watching him with intensity that made him self-conscious about the grease probably still under his nails. He worked on her car while they talked, easy conversation that flowed naturally. She mentioned running a company, but didn't specify what kind. He mentioned having a daughter, but not that his wife had died. They existed in that space of pleasant, stranger interaction where you could be whoever you wanted to be. When he finished refusing payment because his father had taught him you help people without expecting anything back, she followed his taillights to the cafe. They pulled into the parking lot at the same time, and Deshaun held the door open for her because his mother would haunt him if he didn't. Inside, Harper greeted him with the warmth of someone who'd known him since he was 12, and his dad used to bring him here after garage work. Deshaun Washington? He raised his hand, feeling awkward. That's me. Harper's smile widened. Your date just arrived, Isabella Hartwell. The woman from the car turned, and Deshaun felt his brain trying to process what was happening. The stranger he'd helped, the woman with the expensive coat and the broken alternator, was Isabella. His blind date was the person he'd just spent 20 minutes with on the side of the road. Their eyes met mutual recognition and surprise, and something that might have been relief. You're Deshaun. Her voice came out higher than normal. You're Isabella. He sounded just as shocked. They both started laughing at the same time, the absurdity of it breaking through the awkwardness. They'd been heading to the same place, had met before they were supposed to meet, had built a connection without the pressure of knowing it was a date. Harper led them to a corner booth with barely concealed amusement, and Deshaun slid in across from Isabella, still processing. She spoke first. So you didn't know it was me when you stopped? Deshaun ran his hand over his head, nervous gesture from high school that he'd never broken. My sister didn't show me a picture, just said her name's Isabella. Be nice, don't screw it up. Isabella laughed, something genuine and unguarded. Rachel didn't show me anything either. Just said you were a good dad, and I needed to give this a shot. The ridiculousness of it hit them both, how they'd been dreading the same date, how his help had literally saved them from awkward introductions, how they'd already established rapport without trying. Deshaun leaned back. So should we start over then? Isabella's smile was real, reaching her eyes. Hi, I'm Isabella. My car broke down on the way to a blind date I didn't want to go on. Deshaun grinned. Hi, I'm Deshaun. I stopped to help a stranger so I'd be late to a blind date I also didn't want to go on. Harper appeared with coffee, and they both ordered, at the exact same time, looked at each other, started laughing again. Maybe Deshaun thought this night wasn't going to be a disaster after all. The conversation flowed like water, finding its path easy and natural in ways that Deshaun hadn't experienced since Keisha. Isabella listened when he talked, really listened, instead of just waiting for her turn to speak. And her questions were thoughtful rather than performative. He found himself telling her about the garage, about his father's legacy, about the customers who'd become family over decades. Mrs. Patterson, who brought him cookies every Christmas. The high school kid who paid in installments because his parents had cut him off. The single mom whose transmission he'd fixed at cost because she was working 3 jobs to feed her kids. Isabella's attention never wavered. Her dark eyes focused on his face like he was saying something important, instead of just rambling about an auto shop that barely broke even. When he told her about the guy who'd brought in a transmission held together with chewing gum, her laugh was full and unself-conscious, the kind that made other diners look over and smile reflexively. I'm sorry, chewing gum, like the kind you chew. Deshaun nodded, completely serious. Big red cinnamon flavor. I could smell it from 10 feet away. He looked me dead in the eye and said his buddy told him it would work temporarily. Isabella was laughing so hard, tears formed in her eyes. What did you tell him? I told him his buddy was an idiot and sold him a rebuilt transmission at cost because I felt bad for him. The laughter faded into something softer, and Isabella studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You do that a lot, don't you? Help people even when it costs you. Deshaun shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. My pops always said you can either be rich or you can sleep at night, and I'd rather sleep at night. He talked about his father more than he meant to, about the man who'd built the garage from nothing and taught him that reputation mattered more than profit, about the philosophy that had guided Washington's garage for 4 decades, treating people right, even when it hurt the bottom line. Isabella's expression shifted into something that looked like longing, or maybe recognition. When she spoke, her voice was quieter. I've spent the last 2 years surrounded by people who'd sell their grandmother for a good quarterly return. And here you are fixing transmissions at cost and stopping for strangers in snowstorms. Harper brought coffee refills, and Deshawn flagged her down, grateful for the interruption before the conversation got too heavy. He needed to redirect to learn about Isabella instead of just talking about himself. What about you? What's it like running a fashion company? The question made Isabella's expression shudder slightly, like he'd hit on something painful. Her fingers wrapped around the coffee mug, and Deshawn noticed her nails were perfectly manicured, but bitten at the edges, a tell that spoke of stress. Honestly, right now it's like watching something you built with your bare hands slowly fall apart and not being able to stop it. The rawness in her voice caught him off guard. This wasn't polite first date conversation. This was real pain, real fear, and Deshawn found himself leaning forward without thinking. That bad? Isabella looked at him, something in her expression evaluating whether he could handle the truth. Whatever she saw made her decide to trust him, and the words came tumbling out. She told him about investors breathing down her neck, about expansion deadlines that felt impossible, about 200 employees whose livelihoods depended on decisions she wasn't sure she could make correctly. The story poured out like she'd been holding it in for months, and Deshawn just listened, giving her the space to be honest. We need to expand by January 15th or they pull all funding, Isabella said, staring into her coffee like it held answers. And the only location that works is this property on Market Street. But the timeline's so tight, and I just keep thinking, what if I can't pull it off in Market Street? The words hit Deshawn like ice water, but before he could process it, before he could ask which property, Isabella kept talking. It's this perfect space for our flagship store, but it means displacing existing tenants. And I know that makes me the villain in someone else's story, but I've got 200 people who will lose their jobs if I don't make this happen. She cut herself off, seeming to realize she'd said too much, and Deshawn pushed down the spike of anxiety because Market Street was a long road and there were multiple commercial properties. It probably wasn't Mr. Chen's building. The odds were against that kind of coincidence. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand, contact that was probably too familiar for a first date, but felt necessary. Hey, you're clearly brilliant and tough as hell. You'll figure it out. The touch made her look up, and something passed between them, a connection that went deeper than the surface conversation. Deshawn felt it in his chest, a pull toward this woman who was struggling with impossible choices and trying to do right by people, even when the options all felt wrong. Harper brought the check, and Deshawn grabbed it before Isabella could react, waving off her protest with a smile. You can get the next one. Isabella raised an eyebrow, playful. Pretty confident there's going to be a next one. Deshawn's smile widened. Well, yeah, I still owe you for the entertainment value of watching your face when you realized I was your date. They walked out into snow that was falling heavier now, coating everything in white, and Isabella's car looked like a frosted cake under the streetlights. Deshawn studied it with professional assessment, already knowing what he was going to find. That alternator's not going to last the night. I can fix it properly tomorrow if you want. Shop's closed for Christmas, but I'll be there anyway doing paperwork. Isabella hesitated, and he could see her weighing it, the decision meaning more than just car repairs. Accepting meant crossing some line from blind date into something with possibility. I don't want to ruin your Christmas. Deshawn laughed. Trust me, my Christmas is going to be a 6-year-old waking me up at 5 a.m. to open presents and then watching Elf for the millionth time. Fixing your car would actually be a nice break. The words came out before he could stop them. Isabella's voice soft but determined. Can I meet her? Deshawn's surprise must have shown on his face because Isabella's expression shifted to uncertainty, words tumbling out faster. Zoe, you mentioned she likes fashion, and that's kind of my whole thing. But if it's too soon or weird, just forget I said anything. He was smiling at her in a way that felt dangerous, like opening a door he'd kept locked for 4 years. Tomorrow afternoon, say around 2, fair warning though, she's going to lose her mind when she finds out who you are. They exchanged numbers, fingers brushing, as they traded phones, and Deshawn felt that spark again, the pull of something that could be real if he let it. Isabella drove off with her patched alternator taillights disappearing into the snow, and Deshawn sat in his truck for a long moment before starting the engine. He pulled out his phone, found Tanya's contact, sent a simple text. The date was good. Her response came in seconds. Good. That's all I get. Details, Deshawn. But he was already driving his mind, replaying the evening the way Isabella's laugh had sounded the moment their hands had touched the fact that she wanted to meet Zoe, which meant she was thinking about a future that involved more than just one dinner. He didn't let himself think too hard about the Market Street comment about the possibility that the property she needed was the one Mr. Chen owned. The odds were small. Miami had dozens of commercial properties. It was probably nothing. And even if it was something, he'd deal with it when the time came. For now, he let himself feel something he hadn't felt in 4 years' hope. Christmas Eve afternoon arrived with the kind of anticipation that made Deshaun check his watch every 10 minutes. Zoe had been vibrating with excitement since he'd told her someone special was coming to visit, and she'd changed outfits 3 times before settling on her reindeer pajamas because they're festive and comfortable, Daddy. The apartment was cleaner than it had been in months, Deshaun having stress cleaned while Zoe was still asleep. He'd vacuumed and dusted and hidden the stack of bills that lived on the kitchen counter, transforming the small space into something presentable. Photos of Keisha still covered the walls, and Deshaun had considered taking some down before deciding that would be dishonest. This was his life, his history, and anyone who came into it needed to see the whole truth. Zoe sat at the kitchen table with her shoebox of drawings, organizing them by importance, while keeping up a running commentary about what Isabella might like to see. This one is a wedding dress with a really long train, and this one is a superhero costume, but make it fashion, and this one, the doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock and Zoe launched herself toward it with a scream that probably violated noise ordinances. Deshaun caught her before she could rip the door open. Pumpkin, we talked about this. Normal voice, normal behavior. But Daddy, there's a princess at the door. He opened it to find Isabella standing there in jeans and a sweater, holding a bag from an expensive craft store, looking nervous in a way that made her more human than the polished woman from last night. Before Deshaun could say anything, Zoe's eyes went huge behind her glasses. You're Isabella Hartwell, from the magazine. Daddy, she's famous. Isabella laughed, kneeling to Zoe's level. Not a princess, sweetheart. I'm Isabella. Zoe grabbed her hand without hesitation, dragging her inside with the confidence of a child who'd never learned to be shy around strangers. Deshaun followed, watching this woman who'd sat across from him last night transform in real time into someone softer, more open, as Zoe pulled out her drawings. Isabella sat on the floor in designer jeans that probably cost more than Deshaun's monthly grocery budget, going through each drawing with genuine attention. Her comments weren't patronizing or generic, they were specific and thoughtful, pointing out Zoe's eye for proportion and her instinct for flow. These are incredible, Zoe. Have you ever tried draping fabric? Zoe shook her head, confused, and Isabella's face lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that made Deshaun's chest tight. She grabbed a bedsheet from his linen closet, showed Zoe how to drape it over a chair to create different silhouettes. Within minutes, they were both on the floor giggling and creating makeshift fashion designs. And Deshaun stood in the kitchen doorway with hot chocolate mugs in his hands, watching his carefully constructed world shift. Isabella looked up, catching his expression, and smiled in a way that felt intimate despite Zoe's presence. He handed her a mug covered in whipped cream, and their fingers brushed in the exchange. You're good with her, he said, keeping his voice low. Isabella's smile widened. She makes it easy. They spent the afternoon like that, the three of them, and it felt weirdly natural, like they'd been doing this forever. When Zoe climbed into Isabella's lap to show her a particularly complicated dress sketch, Deshaun saw something crack open in Isabella's expression, some defense lowering. Zoe, with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, looked up at Isabella. Are you Daddy's girlfriend? Deshaun nearly dropped his hot chocolate, and Isabella's eyes went wide. Zoe, we just met. You can't just ask people that. But Zoe was already continuing with 6-year-old logic. But you like her. I can tell. You smile different. Deshaun opened his mouth to deny it, to explain that it was too soon and too complicated. But Isabella was laughing and Zoe kept going. And Daddy needs someone nice because he's been sad since Mommy died, but he pretends he's not. The room went silent. Deshaun felt his expression shudder, grief and embarrassment and protective instinct all colliding. He hadn't talked about Keisha, hadn't mentioned being a widower, had kept that part locked away because it felt too heavy for first-date conversation. I'm going to go check your car. He managed his voice tight and disappeared downstairs to the garage before Isabella could say anything. The garage was cold and quiet, and Deshaun leaned against the workbench, breathing carefully. He could hear Zoe and Isabella's voices upstairs muffled through the floor, and he pressed his palms against his eyes. This was too fast, too much. He'd let himself get caught up in the possibility of connection and forgotten that his life was complicated in ways that made dating basically impossible. After a few minutes, he pulled himself together, grabbing tools to actually work on Isabella's car like he'd promised. The alternator replacement was mechanical and soothing, requiring focus that kept his mind from spiraling. Upstairs, Isabella held Zoe close, the little girl looking worried. "Did I make Daddy sad?" Isabella pulled her closer. "No, baby, you didn't. Your daddy just misses your mommy a lot." Zoe nodded like this made perfect sense. "Aunt Tanya says that's why he needs someone new to love, so he can be happy again." Isabella's heart shattered because this child understood too much carried wisdom that shouldn't belong to someone so young. She was about to respond when Zoe shifted topics with the attention span of a 6-year-old. "Daddy's worried about the garage." Isabella's attention sharpened. "Why is that, sweetheart?" Zoe shrugged, playing with Isabella's bracelet. "Some fancy people want to buy our building. Daddy said we might have to move." Ice slid down Isabella's spine. "What building?" Zoe pointed toward the floor. "This one. Washington's garage. It's on Market Street, the little mall place with the pizza shop and the dry cleaners." The world tilted. Isabella's vision tunneled because she knew that property knew it intimately, had the acquisition papers sitting on her desk with the address circled in red. The building they wanted to demolish to put up her flagship store was the garage directly below her feet. The garage Deshawn owned the business he'd built, the legacy his father had started, and she was the one about to destroy it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Text from Christopher. "Board meeting moved to January 10th. Need final decision on Market Street property, ASAP." Isabella stared at the message, feeling sick. The universe had just handed her an impossible choice: save her company and destroy the man she was falling for, or save Deshawn and watch everything she'd built crumble into nothing. There was no world where she got to have both. Isabella made her excuses with words that felt hollow, even as they left her mouth something about a work emergency that couldn't wait, watching Zoe's face fall from joy into confusion. The little girl's voice followed her down the stairs, asking if she'd done something wrong, and Isabella had to keep walking because if she turned around, she'd break completely. Her car started on the first try, the new alternator humming perfectly, and Isabella drove 3 blocks before pulling over because her hands were shaking too badly to hold the wheel steady. The Market Street property documents lived in her briefcase, always within reach, and she pulled them out with fingers that felt numb. There it was, in black and white: 847 Market Street, mixed-use commercial property. 6 tenants, including Washington's garage leaseholder, Deshawn M. Washington, 40-year tenant history. The words blurred together as her vision swam, and Isabella pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. Christopher's name appeared on her phone screen before the device actually rang. His voice came through, sharp with urgency. "Tell me you got my text. Gerald's losing his mind about the timeline." Isabella's throat was too tight to speak properly. "We can't buy it." The silence stretched long enough that she checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Christopher's voice returned, carefully controlled. "What do you mean we can't buy it?" "That property is our only option. The investors love the location the timeline works." "Isabella, what the hell is going on?" She forced the words out. "The owner is someone I know. We can't do this to him." "Someone you know." Christopher's tone went flat, dangerous. "You're tanking our company for a guy you've known for, what, 48 hours? He's a single father. That garage is his whole livelihood, his late wife's dream. His father built that business from the ground up." Christopher cut her off. "And what about the 200 people who work for us? What about their livelihoods? You going to look them in the eye and tell them they are unemployed because you caught feelings for some mechanic?" The accusation hit like a physical blow because he was right and she hated it. Isabella didn't have an answer that made sense. Didn't have a way to explain that destroying Deshawn's garage felt like destroying the best part of herself she'd found in years. She hung up without responding, Christopher's voice still demanding answers as the call disconnected. The drive home happened on autopilot muscle memory, navigating streets while her mind spiraled through impossible calculations. If they didn't buy Market Street, Gerald would pull funding. Without funding, payroll stopped in 6 weeks, maybe 8 if they were lucky. 200 employees, most with families and mortgages and lives built on the assumption that their jobs were stable. Her penthouse felt like a museum when she walked in, all expensive surfaces and carefully curated art. Nothing that suggested an actual human lived here. Isabella dropped her purse on the counter and went straight to the windows, watching the city lights blur through tears she didn't remember, starting to cry. Rachel's contact photo flashed on the screen, her best friend's timing impeccable as always. The call connected, and Rachel's voice came through gentle. "So how'd it go with meeting Zoe?" Isabella's composure cracked. "I have to destroy his business." She told Rachel everything, the words tumbling out in fragments. The Market Street property, the impossible timeline, Gerald's ultimatum, the way Zoe had looked at her like maybe she could be part of their family, the feeling of Deshawn's hand covering hers across the table. Rachel listened without interrupting, letting Isabella spiral until the words ran out. "Okay," Rachel's voice was steady. "Let's think about this rationally. Are there other properties that could work? We've looked at everything within our budget. Market Street is the only location that fits the criteria in the timeline. Can you negotiate a different timeline with Gerald? He's already threatening to pull out if we don't accelerate. Pushing back would give him an excuse to walk completely." Rachel's exhale was thoughtful. "What if you talk to Deshawn? Explain the situation, offered him help relocating? And say what exactly?" Isabella's laugh was bitter. "Sorry I didn't mention my company wants to demolish your garage, but here's some money to make it better. He'll think I played him, that everything between us was manipulation to make the acquisition easier." "Was it?" "No." The word came out fierce. "I didn't know. I swear to God, Rach, I had no idea until Zoe said the address." "Then tell him that. Be honest, work together to find a solution that doesn't require you choosing between your company and your conscience." Isabella wanted to believe that was possible, wanted to imagine a world where honesty and good intentions could overcome fundamental conflicts of interest. But she'd spent enough years in business to know that sometimes there were no good solutions, only choices between different kinds of damage. She thanked Rachel and ended the call, standing alone in her expensive apartment with the weight of 200 livelihoods pressing against her chest. The next 3 days passed in a fog of avoidance and anxiety. Isabella ignored Deshawn's texts, watched them pile up with increasing concern. The first one came Christmas morning, cheerful and innocent. "Zoe wanted me to tell you Merry Christmas. She's still talking about the fabric draping." The second arrived that evening. "Haven't heard from you. Everything okay?" The third came on the 26th. "If I did something wrong, I'm sorry. Would really like to see you again." Each message felt like a knife twisting because she wanted to answer so badly it physically hurt. But what could she say? How did you tell someone that you were the architect of their destruction? Christopher called every few hours with updates that made things worse. Gerald wanted the purchase agreement signed by December 28th. The board was demanding a presentation on expansion strategy. Their main competitor had announced a new flagship location, stealing market attention that should have been theirs. Isabella worked from home, avoiding the office and the employees whose jobs depended on her making the right choice. She lived on coffee and the Greek yogurt that had been in her fridge since before everything fell apart, sleeping in 2-hour increments between panic attacks. The flashbacks came at 3 a.m. when she couldn't sleep, memories she'd spent years trying to bury surfacing with cruel clarity. She was 22 again, standing in her parents' mansion in Greenwich, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, trying to explain to her father why she was dropping out of Yale Law to start a fashion company. His voice had been cold with disappointment. "You have a trust fund that would let you live comfortably, doing nothing, and you want to throw it away on clothes." Her mother had said nothing, just sipped her wine and looked out the window like Isabella wasn't worth the effort of conversation. "I want to build something that's mine," Isabella had tried to explain. "Something that matters." Her father's laugh had been sharp. "You want to play at being self-made while using family connections and trust fund money as a safety net. Let me know when you're ready to be serious about your future." She'd left that night, taken her trust fund, and proved him wrong through sheer force of will. Built her company from nothing into something real, hired people who believed in her vision, created a brand that meant something beyond just profit margins. Except now that brand was failing, and she was back to being the girl in the expensive dress watching her dreams collapse because she couldn't figure out how to be ruthless enough to survive. The memory shifted forward to her first investor meeting with Gerald Pemberton, his office all glass and steel, and the kind of modern art that existed solely to signal wealth. He'd looked at her business plan for exactly 4 minutes before speaking. "You're proposing aggressive expansion with no clear path to profitability. Why should I invest in a vanity project?" Isabella had pulled out her market research, her customer testimonials, her vision for sustainable fashion that didn't compromise on style. She'd talk for 30 minutes straight, her throat dry, but her conviction absolute. Gerald had signed the check because he saw something in her determination. But his words had come with conditions. "I don't invest in failures. You want my money, you deliver results. No excuses, no sentiment, just growth." She'd agreed because she'd been 24 and stupid enough to think she could meet anyone's expectations if she worked hard enough. Now she was 29 and drowning in the consequences of promises she couldn't keep. Her phone buzzed with a new text from an unknown number. The message made her stomach drop. "This is Lin Chen. My father asked me to reach out. We need to discuss your company's interest in the Market Street property. Can we meet tomorrow?" Isabella typed back with shaking fingers. "Yes, where and when?" Lynn's response came quickly with an address and time, and Isabella added it to her calendar with the feeling of someone scheduling their own execution. Across town, Deshaun was having his own crisis of faith in an apartment that felt too quiet without Zoe's constant chatter. She was with Tanya for a post-Christmas sleepover, leaving him alone with thoughts that spiraled darker the longer Isabella stayed silent. He'd replayed their evening together 100 times, trying to figure out where he'd gone wrong. Had he talked too much about Keisha? Had bringing up his father's philosophy been too heavy for a first date? Had inviting her to meet Zoe been too forward? Or maybe the problem was simpler. Maybe she'd realized he was a widower living above a garage, barely making ends meet, and decided she could do better. Tanya had called twice to check on him, her voice careful in that way that meant she was worried but trying not to show it. "Have you heard from Isabella?" "No," Deshaun kept his voice neutral. "I'm sure she's busy with the holidays." "Deshaun, you don't ghost someone after meeting their kid unless something's really wrong." He'd ended the call before Tanya could push harder, before he had to admit out loud that this hurt worse than he'd expected. He'd let himself hope, let himself imagine a future that included someone who looked at him the way Isabella had looked at him across that table. The garage needed inventory work, mindless counting that would keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. Deshaun headed downstairs, flipping on the fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered before settling into steady brightness. His father's tools hung on the pegboard exactly where Marcus Washington Sr. had left them, organized with the precision that had defined his approach to everything. Deshaun ran his fingers over a wrench worn smooth from decades of use, feeling the weight of legacy in cold metal. The memory came unbidden, sharp and painful in its clarity. He was 17 working in the garage after school, and his father was teaching him how to diagnose transmission problems by sound alone. You hear that clicking? That's the torque converter. Feel the vibration. That's your worn gears. A good mechanic listens to what the car's telling him, doesn't just throw parts at symptoms. Deshaun had been impatient then, wanting shortcuts and quick fixes, and his father had grabbed his shoulder with oil-stained hands. "This garage is your inheritance, but it's also your responsibility. Every customer who walks through that door is trusting us with something they need. We don't break that trust, not for money, not for convenience. Our reputation is built one honest job at a time." 3 months later, his father had died of a heart attack in the middle of a brake job, slumped over Mrs. Patterson's Honda, and Deshaun had taken over the business at 17 with no idea how to run a company, but absolute certainty that he couldn't let his father's legacy die. The next memory hurt worse because it was more recent. Keisha in their bed, her body too thin from treatments that weren't working, her natural hair growing back in patches after the second round of chemotherapy. She'd been crying not from pain but from fear of leaving Zoe without a mother. Deshaun had held her helpless against cancer's cruel mathematics. "You're going to beat this." Her laugh had been weak, but knowing, "We both know that's not true. Promise me something. Anything. Keep the garage open. I know it's hard. I know the money's tight. But it's what connects Zoe to your father and to our history. Promise me you won't let it go." He'd promised because how could he not? How could he deny a dying woman her last request? Keisha had died 6 weeks later, and Deshaun had spent the next 4 years honoring that promise, even when keeping the business open meant working 18-hour days and choosing between paying rent and paying himself. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled Deshawn from the spiral of memory. Mr. Chen appeared in the doorway, moving with the careful slowness of someone who'd lived 83 years and felt every one of them. Deshawn, you have a minute. Deshawn straightened concern, immediate. Of course, Mr. Chen. Everything okay with the building? The old man's expression was troubled, and he gestured toward the office. We need to talk about the property. They sat in the cramped space where Deshawn did paperwork, Mr. Chen settling into the chair with a sigh that spoke of burdens carried too long. I received an offer for the building. A fashion company wants to buy it for a flagship store. They're offering significantly above market value. Deshawn's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. Are you considering selling? Mr. Chen's hands were weathered and marked with age spots, and he folded them carefully. Lynn thinks I should. She says I'm too old to keep managing rental properties, that the money would secure her children's education, that it's foolish to turn down this kind of opportunity. But you don't want to sell. The old man's smile was sad. Your father and I built our businesses together. He opened the garage the same year I finished this building. We raised our children in this neighborhood, watched it change and grow. Selling feels like betraying 40 years of history. Deshawn felt the foundations of his world shifting. What company made the offer? Hartwell and Company. Fashion, apparently. They want to demolish the existing structure and build something modern. Mr. Chen pulled out a folder, sliding it across the desk. The offer letter mentions you specifically says they're willing to help with relocation costs for existing tenants. Deshawn opened the folder with hands that wanted to shake. The letterhead showed Hartwell and Company's logo, elegant and expensive, and the signature at the bottom made his vision. Tunnel. Isabella Hartwell, CEO. The words on the page blurred as understanding crashed over him. Isabella hadn't ghosted him because of something he'd done wrong. She'd disappeared because her company was the one trying to destroy his garage, because she'd known the whole time they were sitting across from each other that this collision was inevitable. Mr. Chen's voice seemed to come from very far away. Do you know this woman? Deshawn's laugh was harsh. I thought I did. He read through the offer letter, seeing the clinical language that reduced his father's legacy to square footage and estimated relocation costs. There was a personal note attached in handwriting he recognized from the phone number she'd written down, words that tried to soften the blow. I know this is difficult. I want to discuss options that work for everyone involved. Deshawn crumpled the note, rage and betrayal warring in his chest. She'd sat at his table, played with his daughter, looked him in the eye and talked about impossible choices while knowing she was the one forcing those choices on him. Mr. Chen watched with concern. The meeting is tomorrow morning. Lynn wants to hear their full proposal. I wanted you to know before we sat down with them. Tell them no. The words came out flat, absolute. Tell them the property's not for sale. Deshawn, I understand your feelings, but Lynn has power of attorney for my business affairs. She's convinced this is the right financial decision. The world was crumbling in slow motion, and Deshawn couldn't stop it. He thanked Mr. Chen, waited until the old man left, then sat alone in the office, surrounded by his father's legacy, and stared at Isabella's handwriting until the words stopped making sense. His phone sat on the desk, filled with unanswered texts to a woman who'd known all along what her company planned to do. Deshawn picked it up, typed out a message with hands that shook from fury. I know about the Market Street offer. Don't contact me again. He hit send before he could second-guess it, watching the message deliver and feeling something vital break inside his chest. The next morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Deshawn dropped Zoe at school, listening to her talk about Isabella, and when they'd see her again, and he couldn't bring himself to explain that they wouldn't, that the woman she'd started calling the pretty lady who knows fashion was the same person trying to destroy everything they had. Tanya showed up at the garage at 10, letting herself in with the spare key and finding Deshawn elbow-deep in an engine rebuild. You look like hell. Good morning to you, too. She perched on his workbench. Are you going to tell me what happened with Isabella? Or do I have to guess? Deshawn straightened, wiping his hands on a rag that was already beyond saving. Her company wants to buy this building, demolish it for a flagship store. She knew the whole time. Tanya's expression shifted through shock to anger. She knew when you met her. I don't think she knew at the cafe, but she definitely knew when she came to meet Zoe. That's why she ran out claiming a work emergency. Deshawn's voice was bitter, couldn't face what she was planning to do. Maybe there's an explanation. The explanation is that I'm an idiot who thought someone like her could actually be interested in someone like me. Should have known better. Tanya grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. Don't do that. Don't make this about you not being good enough. If she lied, that's on her character, not your worth. But Deshawn was already building walls, retreating into the familiar safety of anger, because it hurt less than admitting how much he'd let himself hope. His phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the morning, Isabella's name appearing over and over with incoming calls. He declined. The text piled up, each one more desperate than the last. Please let me explain. It's not what you think. I didn't know until Zoe told me the address. I'm trying to find a solution. He deleted them without reading past the preview text, because nothing she said could change the fundamental truth. Her company wanted his garage, and in any fight between a struggling mechanic and a fashion CEO with investor backing, there was only one outcome. The afternoon brought Tanya's confrontation with Isabella, though Deshawn wouldn't know about it until later. Tanya marched into Hartwell and Company's downtown office with the fury of a woman defending family, bypassing security and receptionists through sheer force of will. She found Isabella's office on the 14th floor, walked past an assistant trying to stop her, and planted herself in front of a desk covered with property documents. Isabella looked up from her computer, and Tanya watched her face crumble in recognition. I'm Deshawn's sister, and we need to talk. Isabella stood, professional mask sliding into place despite the obvious exhaustion. I'm really busy right now. Tanya pulled out a folded piece of paper, slamming it on the desk. Zoe wanted me to give you this, and then I'm leaving. But you should know that Deshawn hasn't smiled once since Christmas Eve, and that little girl thinks she did something to scare you away. Isabella unfolded the drawing with hands that trembled. 3 stick figures holding hands under a Christmas tree, labeled in crayon with Daddy, me, and Isabella. Underneath, in Zoe's careful 6-year-old handwriting, my Christmas wish, please don't leave us. Tanya watched Isabella's face as the professional mask shattered completely, tears spilling over and landing on the drawing. I don't know what happened between you two, but Deshawn hasn't been this happy in 4 years. And Zoe hasn't attached to someone this fast since her mother died. Just think about that. She left before Isabella could respond, before the woman's obvious pain could make her soften. Isabella sat alone in her office, staring at Zoe's drawing while her vision blurred. The meeting with Lin Chen was in 30 minutes. Christopher was demanding final approval on the purchase agreement, and Gerald had sent 3 increasingly hostile emails about commitment and decisiveness. Her phone showed 47 missed calls to Deshawn, every text marked as delivered but unread. She tried everything she could think of to explain, to apologize, to make him understand that she hadn't known, hadn't meant for any of this to happen. But his last message had been clear. I know about the Market Street offer. Don't contact me again. Christopher appeared in her doorway. Lin Chen is here, conference room 3. Gerald's on video call, and he's already in a mood about the delayed timeline. Isabella looked at Zoe's drawing one more time, then carefully folded it and put it in her desk drawer. She stood smoothing her skirt and rebuilding the professional armor that had cracked under the weight of impossible choices. Let's get this over with. The conference room held Lin Chen, her lawyer, and Gerald Pemberton's face on the video screen, looking impatient and expensive. Christopher sat to Isabella's right, a folder of documents ready for signing. Gerald spoke first, his voice clipped. Ms. Hartwell, I've been very patient with your delays on this acquisition. I need a commitment today. Isabella's hands were folded on the table, her voice steady through force of will alone. We need to discuss the existing tenants. The garage specifically has been there for 40 years. Relocation costs are included in the offer. Gerald cut her off. This is business, not charity. Either commit to the purchase, or I'm withdrawing our investment partnership, effective immediately. Lin Chen spoke up, her voice professional. My father is elderly and sentimental about the property, but the financial reality is clear. Your offer is generous, and the timing works for his retirement planning. Everything was lined up perfectly. All Isabella had to do was sign the paperwork, commit to the purchase, and save her company. 200 employees would keep their jobs. Her investors would be satisfied, and her father would never get to say that she'd failed at the one thing she'd built without his money. All it would con was destroying the man she'd fallen for and breaking the heart of a 6-year-old girl who'd wished for her to stay. Christopher slid the purchase agreement across the table, a pen placed carefully on top. Isabella stared at it, calculating how many hours she had until Gerald's deadline expired. 48 hours, maybe less. She picked up the pen, feeling the weight of it, feeling 200 futures balanced against one. The choice should have been obvious. It wasn't. Isabella set the pen down without signing, the click of it against the table, echoing louder than it should have in the conference room's perfect acoustics. Gerald's face on the screen turned a shade of red that probably violated color theory. "Ms. Hartwell, what exactly are you doing?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm not signing until we explore alternatives." Christopher's hand gripped her arm under the table, warning pressure that she ignored. Lin Chen's lawyer leaned forward, confusion evident in his expression, and Gerald's voice rose to a volume that made the speakers crackle. "There are no alternatives. This is the location. This is the timeline. This is the deal. You sign today or I pull every penny and you explain to your employees why they're job hunting in January." Isabella met his gaze through the screen, feeling something crystallize in her chest. "Then pull it. I won't build my success on destroying someone else's legacy." The room erupted. Christopher was standing, his voice sharp with panic. Lin Chen's lawyer was shuffling papers, recalculating timelines. Gerald was threatening legal action for breach of contract, his words coming so fast they blurred together. Isabella stood gathering her materials with hands that had stopped shaking. "I'm sorry for wasting your time, Ms. Chen. The offer is withdrawn." She walked out while Gerald was still shouting, Christopher, following 3 steps behind, demanding to know if she'd lost her mind completely. The elevator doors closed on his increasingly frantic questions, and Isabella rode down 14 floors in silence, broken only by the mechanical hum of descent. Her office felt different when she returned to it, like she was seeing it clearly for the first time in months. The expensive furniture and the view that cost extra, and the framed magazine covers showcasing her success, all of it suddenly felt hollow. Zoe's drawing sat in her desk drawer, and Isabella pulled it out, studying the 3 stick figures holding hands. This child had wished for her to stay, had drawn a future where Isabella belonged in their family, and she'd almost signed away that possibility for quarterly projections. Her phone buzzed with Christopher's name, but Isabella declined the call. She had maybe 3 hours before Gerald made good on his threats, 3 hours to figure out if there was a way to save her company without sacrificing her soul in the process. The Market Street property documents spread across her desk, and Isabella studied them with fresh eyes. The building was 5,000 square feet over 2 floors, the garage occupying 2,500 of ground-level space. Their original plan had been demolition and rebuild, a gleaming flagship store rising from the rubble of the old. But what if they didn't demolish? Isabella pulled up architectural software on her computer, her mind racing through possibilities. Mixed-use development wasn't uncommon, commercial and retail sharing space in ways that benefited both. The building was structurally sound, according to the inspection report, which meant vertical expansion was feasible. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up comparable projects, studying how other companies had integrated blue-collar businesses with high-end retail. There was a coffee roaster in Portland that shared space with a designer boutique, the contrast creating buzz that benefited both. A furniture maker in Austin whose workshop was visible from the showroom floor, letting customers watch craftsmanship in action. What if Washington's garage stayed on ground level and Hartwell and Company built above it? The concept formed in her mind with sudden clarity, pieces clicking together like a perfectly tailored seam. They'd keep the garage operational partner with Deshawn on automotive services for their customers, create a unique brand story about legacy meeting innovation. Isabella started sketching rough concepts that an architect could refine. The garage entrance on Market Street maintaining its street presence and community connection. A separate entrance for the flagship store leading to upper floors dedicated to retail. Glass features that would let natural light through while maintaining the building's character. Christopher burst into her office without knocking. "Gerald just sent termination paperwork. We have until end of business tomorrow to change your mind, or we're done." Isabella looked up from her sketches. "What if we don't need Gerald? Are you insane? We need his capital. We need his connections. What if we build around the garage instead of demolishing it?" Isabella turned her laptop screen toward him. "Mixed development partnership model, everybody wins." Christopher stared at the screen, then at her, then back at the screen. His expression shifted from fury to confusion to something that might have been interest. "That's actually kind of brilliant." Blue collar meets high fashion, heritage meets innovation, community partnership instead of corporate takeover. Isabella was talking faster now, ideas pouring out. We service our customers' cars, they bring business to the garage. The whole thing becomes a story that sets us apart from every other flagship store in the country. Christopher pulled up, air leaning over the laptop. The investors would need to see numbers, construction costs for vertical expansion versus demolition and rebuild, projected revenue from partnership synergies, customer acquisition models. I'll have the proposal ready by tomorrow morning. Isabella was already pulling up contractor contacts, architectural firms that specialized in mixed-use development. We present to the board at the emergency meeting Gerald's probably already scheduling. And if they say no, Isabella met his eyes, then at least I can look at myself in the mirror. She worked through the night fueled by coffee and determination and the memory of Deshawn's hand covering hers across the table. The proposal took shape in spreadsheets and architectural renderings, financial projections that showed how partnership could be more profitable than demolition when you factored in brand differentiation and community goodwill. By 3 a.m., she had a 50-page presentation that made the impossible look not only feasible, but brilliant. By 5 a.m., she'd called in favors from 3 architects who owed her consulting work, getting preliminary structural assessments that confirmed vertical expansion was viable. At 6:30, she called her real estate attorney and had him draft partnership agreements that would give Deshawn equal ownership stake in the mixed-use property. At 7:15, she emailed the full proposal to every board member with the subject line, Alternative Market Street Strategy. Christopher called at 7:45. I've been up all night running your numbers. If this works, Isabella, we're not just saving the company, we're revolutionizing our entire brand position. If it works, Isabella's hands were shaking from caffeine and exhaustion and fear. Gerald's calling an emergency board meeting for 10 a.m. He's planning to force a vote on pulling investment. You need to be ready to fight. Isabella looked at Zoe's drawing still sitting on her desk. I'll be ready. The board meeting happened in the same conference room where she'd refused to sign 24 hours earlier, but the energy was completely different. Gerald's face on the screen radiated fury, and the 5 board members present in person looked skeptical at best. Isabella stood at the head of the table, her presentation queued up, her entire future balanced on the next 30 minutes. I'm proposing we revise our Market Street strategy from acquisition and demolition to partnership and vertical expansion. She walked them through to the concept, showing architectural renderings of how the garage would remain at ground level while Hartwell & Company's flagship store rose above it. She presented financial models demonstrating how partnership created unique value that justified premium pricing. She showed customer research indicating that millennials and Gen Z preferred brands with authentic community connections. Gerald interrupted repeatedly, his objections growing more heated as the presentation progressed. This is sentiment over strategy. You're asking us to partner with a mechanic who operates on margins that wouldn't cover our marketing budget. Isabella didn't flinch. I'm asking us to partner with a 40-year legacy business that represents exactly the authenticity our customers are looking for. Washington's garage isn't just square footage, it's a story that differentiates us in a crowded market. One of the board members, Patricia Chen, spoke up. The construction timeline concerns me. Vertical expansion would take longer than demolition and rebuild. 6 weeks longer, Isabella acknowledged, but we'd maintain community goodwill, avoid the PR nightmare of displacing a beloved local business, and create a partnership model we could replicate in future expansions. The presentation concluded, and the room fell silent except for Gerald's breathing through the speaker system. Isabella stood at the head of the table, her professional armor firmly in place, waiting for judgment. Patricia spoke first. I actually love this concept. The brand positioning is unique. The financials work if your projections hold and the timeline delay is manageable. 2 other board members nodded agreement, but Gerald's voice cut through. This is reckless idealism from a CEO who's letting personal feelings compromise business judgment. I'm exercising my right as lead investor to veto this proposal and demanded we return to the original acquisition plan. Isabella had known this was coming, had prepared for it through the sleepless night. Then I'm buying out your stake with personal assets. The room went silent. Christopher's head snapped toward her. Isabella, you can't. My trust fund, my condo equity, my stock portfolio. Isabella's voice was steady despite her racing heart. I'll liquidate everything to buy Gerald's percentage. We'll find new investors to cover the remaining capital needs. Gerald laughed, the sound harsh through the speakers. You're going to bankrupt yourself for a mechanic you have known 3 days. This is exactly why women shouldn't run companies. Too emotional, too willing to sacrifice strategy for feelings. Isabella felt rage flash through her, cold and clarifying, I'm willing to risk everything because I believe in this strategy. That's not emotion, Mr. Pemberton, that's conviction. And I'd rather build something meaningful than maintain your investment. Patricia was already pulling out her phone. I know 3 venture capital firms who would love this story. Isabella, if you're serious about the personal stake, I can have meetings set up by end of day. The vote happened quickly after that, Gerald's veto overridden by a board majority who saw potential in the partnership model. He disconnected from the video call with threats of legal action that his own lawyer would later talk him out of, and Isabella was left standing in the conference room with a revolutionary strategy and 48 hours to make it reality. Christopher waited until everyone else had left. You just bet everything you have on this working. Isabella gathered her materials. I know. If it fails, you lose your condo, your savings, everything. I know that too. Christopher studied her face. This is about more than just business strategy, isn't it? Isabella thought about Deshawn's hand covering hers, about Zoe's wish, drawn in crayon, about the way she'd felt sitting on their floor creating makeshift fashion designs. This is about building something worth having. The next step was harder than facing down investors. Isabella had to convince Deshawn to even listen to her proposal, which meant going to the garage and confronting his justified anger. She spent an hour preparing, gathering architectural models and partnership agreements, rehearsing explanations that sounded inadequate even in her head. Rachel called 3 times offering moral support, and Tanya texted once with a simple message. Whatever you're planning, it better be good. Isabella arrived at Washington's garage at 2 p.m. with a rolling case full of presentation materials and a heart that wouldn't stop racing. The building looked different now that she wasn't planning to destroy it, the weathered brick and faded signs suddenly beautiful in their authenticity. Deshawn was in the first bay, bent over an engine, and he straightened when he heard her heels on the concrete. His expression shuddered immediately, professional distance replacing any warmth. I thought I said don't contact me. Isabella's voice came out steadier than she felt. I know, but I need 10 minutes to show you something. There's nothing you can show me that changes what your company planned to do. Please. The word cracked slightly. 10 minutes, and if you still want me to leave, I'll go and you'll never hear from me again. Something in her tone must have reached him because Deshawn wiped his hands and gestured toward the office. Isabella wheeled her case behind her, hyper-aware of every detail, the photos of his father on the wall, the ancient coffee maker, the filing cabinets that had probably been there since the 80s. She pulled out the architectural models, setting them on his desk with hands that trembled slightly. I'm not buying the building to demolish it. I'm proposing a partnership. Deshawn stared at the models, his expression unreadable. What kind of partnership? Isabella walked him through the concept, showing how the garage would remain at ground level, while her company built above, how they'd share ownership 50-50, how the partnership would benefit both businesses. She presented financial projections, showing increased revenue for the garage from customer referrals, showed architectural plans that preserved the building's character while adding modern retail space. Deshawn listened without interrupting, his face giving nothing away, and Isabella's panic grew with each passing second of silence. When she finished, he looked up. Why would you do this? Because destroying your garage to save my company felt like destroying the best part of myself. Isabella's voice was raw with honesty. Because Zoe drew a picture where I belong in your family and I wanted it to be true. Because I'd rather risk everything than become the kind of person who bulldozes people's legacies for profit margins. Deshawn's expression cracked slightly. You really didn't know when we met at the cafe, you didn't know about the Market Street plan. I swear to God, Deshawn, I had no idea until Zoe mentioned the address. That's why I ran. That's why I couldn't answer your texts. I was trying to figure out how to save my company without destroying yours. He studied her face, looking for lies, and Isabella let him see everything. The exhaustion, the fear, the desperate hope that he'd give her another chance. This partnership, Deshawn's voice was careful, it gives me equal ownership. 50% of the property equal, say in all decisions, revenue share from the retail space above, and your garage operates independently with no interference from my company. Isabella pulled out the contract she'd had her lawyer draft. Everything in writing, legally binding, protected in perpetuity. Deshawn picked up the contract, reading through it with the careful attention of someone who'd been burned before. Isabella waited, barely breathing, while he absorbed every clause and condition. When he finally looked up, his expression had shifted into something she couldn't quite read. "There's one problem with this proposal." Isabella's heart sank. "What?" "You're offering equal partnership, but you're taking all the financial risk. Your personal assets, your investor relationships, everything's on you while I just keep running my garage like always." "That's because it's my company that needs the expansion." Deshawn cut her off. "And it's my garage that benefits from the partnership. If we're doing this, we're doing it as actual equals. I've got equity in this building through 40 years of rent payments. I've got business assets I can leverage. I've got connections in the community that will matter when we need permits and support." Isabella felt something shift in her chest. "You want to invest? I want to be your partner, not your charity case." Deshawn's smile was small but real. "My dad always said a man's reputation is built on how he handles both success and struggle. If this works, I want to have earned it." They spent the next hour at his desk revising the partnership agreement to reflect equal investment and equal risk. Deshawn called his bank about leveraging his business assets. Isabella called Christopher about adjusting the financial model, and slowly the impossible started looking achievable. By 4 p.m., they had a framework both could live with. By 5 p.m., Deshawn's lawyer had reviewed the revised agreement and given preliminary approval. By 6 p.m., when Zoe burst through the door fresh from Tanya's pickup, they were shaking hands over a partnership that would either save them both or destroy them together. Zoe saw Isabella and screamed, launching herself across the garage into arms that caught her instinctively. "You came back. Daddy said you were busy, but I knew you'd come back." Isabella held her tight, meeting Deshawn's eyes over Zoe's curls. "I'm sorry I disappeared. I had to fix something important." "Did you fix it?" Zoe pulled back to study her face with 6-year-old intensity. "I think so. Your dad and I are going to be business partners." Zoe's confusion was evident. "What's that mean?" Deshawn knelt beside them. "It means Isabella's company and our garage are going to work together. She's going to build her store above the garage, and we're all going to help each other." Understanding dawned on Zoe's face, followed by pure joy. "So you're staying? You're not leaving?" Isabella looked at Deshawn, saw permission in his expression. "I'm staying." The partnership launch happened 3 months later, after permits were secured and construction began, and the story started generating media interest that exceeded even Isabella's optimistic projections. Forbes ran a feature titled "The Partnership Model Disrupting Fashion Retail," with photos of Isabella and Deshawn standing in front of the building they were transforming together. Business Insider covered the community impact angle, interviewing Mr. Chen about how the partnership had preserved his legacy while securing his retirement. Local News did a segment on Zoe's involvement, showing her early fashion sketches that had inspired a children's design workshop Isabella was launching. The construction process was chaotic and expensive, and filled with setbacks that tested their partnership daily. Permit delays pushed the timeline back 6 weeks. Cost overruns required additional capital that Isabella secured through the venture capital firms Patricia had connected her with. Community concerns about gentrification required town halls where Deshawn's presence and reputation made the difference between acceptance and resistance. Through it all, they worked side by side, learning each other's business philosophies and finding unexpected synergies. Deshawn's customer service approach influenced how Isabella trained her retail staff. Isabella's brand strategy helped Deshawn expand the garage's market reach beyond the immediate neighborhood. The grand opening happened on a Saturday in late April. The building transformed, but still recognizable, its heritage visible in preserved brick and the original garage sign restored to gleaming perfection. Washington's garage occupied the ground floor exactly as it had for 40 years. But now the bays gleamed with new equipment purchased through partnership profits, and the customer waiting area had been redesigned with comfort that respected the space's history. Above it, Hartwell and Company's flagship store rose in glass and steel that somehow harmonized with the brick foundation, creating visual interest that architecture magazines would later call industrial elegance. The interior mixed high fashion with automotive heritage, exposed brick and polished chrome designer clothing, displayed alongside framed photos of the garage's 40-year history. The launch event drew 300 people, customers, old and new, media, covering the innovative partnership model, investors who'd taken a chance on Isabella's vision, and community members who'd watched the transformation with initial skepticism that turned to pride. Isabella stood with Deshawn and Zoe cutting the ribbon while cameras flashed and applause echoed off brick walls that had witnessed 4 decades of honest work. The business metrics exceeded projections within the first quarter. The flagship store's unique positioning attracted customers willing to pay premium prices for authentic brand story. The garage's revenue increased 30% from customer referrals and expanded service offerings. The partnership model generated speaking invitations and consulting requests that created additional revenue streams neither had anticipated. But more than the financial success, the partnership transformed how both businesses operated. Isabella learned to value legacy and community connection over pure growth metrics. Deshaun discovered that expansion didn't have to mean selling out, that you could honor your father's memory while building something new. 1 year after that Christmas Eve, when everything had started, they returned to Pinewood Cafe for dinner. The three of them crowded into the same corner booth where Deshaun and Isabella had first realized they were each other's blind date. Zoe was 7 now, bouncing with barely contained energy, her braids decorated with gold beads that caught the Christmas lights strung around the cafe's windows. "This is where you guys met." Well, the first time was when Mommy Isabella's car was broken. Deshaun corrected gently, "Just Isabella, baby." But Zoe shook her head with stubborn certainty. "She said I could call her Mommy Isabella if I wanted because she's going to marry you." Deshaun nearly choked on his coffee, looking at Isabella, who was trying not to laugh. "Did you now?" Isabella shrugged, feigning innocence. "I may have mentioned that was a possibility." Harper appeared with dessert, a slice of pie, with a candle burning brightly for my favorite family on the house. Deshaun pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, his hand steady, despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. They'd practiced this moment that morning, Zoe sworn to secrecy that had lasted approximately 4 hours before she told everyone at school. He opened the box, revealing a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, reset in a modern design that honored both heritage and future. "Isabella Hartwell, you saved my garage, saved my heart, and became the family Zoe wished for on Christmas Eve. Will you marry us?" Isabella was crying before he finished, nodding so hard she probably looked ridiculous. Her professional composure completely abandoned. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The cafe erupted in applause, Harper having definitely alerted every regular that this was happening, and Zoe threw her arms around both of them with 7-year-old force. "Now I get a mommy for every Christmas forever." The wedding happened 6 months later in the same cafe where everything had begun, small and perfect, with just family and friends who'd witnessed the journey from collision to partnership to love. Zoe served as flower girl in a dress she'd designed herself with Isabella's guidance, her natural hair styled in twist-out curls adorned with fresh flowers. She walked down the aisle scattering petals with serious concentration, pausing halfway to announce that she was so happy her daddy wasn't sad anymore. Isabella wore a simple dress in cream silk designed by her own hands for this specific moment, every stitch infused with intention. Deshaun wore his father's suit, altered and updated, carrying that legacy into his future. They exchanged vows they'd written together, promises that acknowledged the messy reality of blended families and business partnerships and love that arrived unexpectedly. "I promise to choose us every time, even when the choice is hard." Harper officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose, and her blessing referenced broken alternators and blind dates and Christmas miracles that proved love found you when you stopped looking. The reception filled the cafe with music and laughter. Same neighbors who'd been skeptical of the partnership now celebrating the family it had created. Mr. Chen gave a toast about legacy and change, about honoring the past while building the future. Tanya's speech made everyone cry, with stories of Deshaun's journey from loss to hope. When Deshaun pulled Isabella onto the makeshift dance floor for their first dance, snow started falling outside the windows. Actual snow in Florida on a June evening, meteorologically impossible, but happening anyway, like the universe was acknowledging that some love stories deserve their own weather patterns. Zoe pressed her face against the glass, watching flakes drift past streetlights. "Mommy Isabella, Daddy, it's snowing just like the night you met." 3 years later, they stood in that same cafe for their anniversary, but the family had grown. Zoe was 10, helping her baby brother navigate his first steps, while keeping a watchful eye on her newborn sister, sleeping in Isabella's arms. The Washington-Hartwell partnership had expanded to 3 more cities, each location following the same mixed-use model that honored existing businesses while creating retail innovation. The original Market Street location had become a case study in business schools, an example of how partnership could generate more value than acquisition. Isabella's company had gone public 6 months prior, the IPO exceeding expectations and making both her and Deshaun millionaires on paper. But they still lived in the apartment above the garage, though it had been expanded and renovated because Deshawn insisted that staying grounded in their origins mattered more than square footage. The Washington Hartwell Foundation had launched the previous year, providing grants to single parents starting businesses and preserving legacy companies threatened by gentrification. Zoe served on the junior advisory board, reviewing applications with the same intensity she brought to her fashion design studies. Harper brought them coffee and pie, the ritual unchanged despite everything that had transformed. You know what I love about you two? You could be anywhere doing anything, but you keep coming back here. Deshawn pulled Isabella close, his other arm wrapped around Zoe. This is where it started, where I stopped for a stranger in a snowstorm and found my future. Isabella looked up at him, her smile soft. Guess we should send a thank you card to that alternator. They laughed, the sound filling the cafe that had witnessed their entire journey, and Zoe captured the moment on her camera because she was documenting their story for the book she planned to write. Outside, no snow fell because it was July, and even Universe's sense of humor had limits. But inside Pinewood Cafe, surrounded by family and history, and the life they'd built from impossible choices, Isabella Hartwell Washington felt something she'd spent years chasing through business success and professional achievement. She felt home. Sometimes the worst nights transform into the best stories, proof that broken alternators can lead to building empires. Sometimes the collision you dread becomes the connection that saves you. And sometimes family finds you in the form of a mechanic who stops in snowstorms and a little girl who wishes on Christmas magic and refuses to accept that love has to choose between legacy and future. You can have both if you're brave enough to build something new from the foundation of what came before.